Welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to be making a few different designs with the array modifier. Let's get to making some arrays. First off, we're going to make this chainmail. So to do that, let's do a new project. So if you're just opening up Blender for today, just do new file general and notice I'm in 2.9. So let's get started and make some chainmail. So before we make the chainmail, let's just look and kind of go over what the array modifier is. So just go ahead and keep your Suzanne. I'm going to switch into Eevee just so it's nice and red and it looks cool. And we're going to go over to the side here. Make sure you have Suzanne selected, and we're going to add a modifier, and it's in the second column here, generate, and it is the array. So go ahead and click on that. Hip hip hooray, we've got an array modifier right here. And if we just close this for just a second, what this will do is essentially just make duplicates of your object in lines. So if we do, 3, now we've got 3. You can, put in as many monkeys as you want. So, we'll just do 3, and that's with fixed count. So that will give you 3 monkeys. And before we go any further, let's save this project because, we are in the beta and the alpha, so it could crash. So let's do File, Save As. And not only that, it is just good practice to do it. So I'm just going to call it Array, Save As. And let's keep going. So we've got the relative offset down here, and that's going to be on by default. And we have our X factor of 1. So imagine there's a bounding box, surrounding the Suzanne. It's going to increase that by a factor of 1. We can also increase the factors on the Y. So say if we typed in 1 here, it's going to, push it back 1 and over to the side 1. Or we could do 1 for the Z, and you guessed it, it's going to kind of stair step them in, kind of a 1 by 1 by 1, fashion. So that's what the relative offset does. So you can also change the fit type to fit length. And now Blender is going to try to make as many monkeys as it can depending on how long you tell it. So if I know that my print bed is 300 millimeters, then what if I type in, like 250, then Blender's going to try to put as many monkeys as it can fit inside of that area. And another cool thing is the next drop down, which is fit to curve. So this is going to try and fit the monkeys to the length of a curve, but right now we don't have a curve, so we need to create one. So just shift a curve right here, the second one, and I'm going to go up to the top here, and let's just do the Bezier curve, and we'll make it like 50 millimeters. So let me move these monkeys up a little bit, GY, and bring them up here to the front. Now we have our little Bezier curve here. So what this will do is the array modifier will talk to this curve if we, pick whip it right here. So I'm just going to click on it, Object, Bezier curve, and it's going to try to fit as many monkeys to however long this curve is. So if I take this line or this curve into edit mode, select one of the points here, hit G to grab it. Notice as I lengthen this curve or this line, it's making more monkeys appear because it's trying to fit as many monkeys as it can on this curve. And in the future, we're going to talk about how we can, say if we wanted to make this line more curvy, the monkeys are still in a straight line, but in the future, I'll show you some modifiers that will get the monkeys to curve like this. But for now, let's just keep it simple and just know that that is just doing, the distance of the line. So that's all it's doing right there. I'm going to go back to object mode, and let's go back to fixed count. Or actually, let's do fixed length. That's fine. So I'm going to do fixed length. And another cool thing that you can do with array modifiers is compound them. So I could just do Shift D while hovering over that, and it's going to duplicate that. And instead of the factor for X, I can change that to 0 and do factor of 1. And looky there. Now it's going to duplicate the monkeys on the y-axis. So it's kind of taking the first array and then multiplying it essentially to make this one. And we can do the same thing again. We'll just hover over this one, Shift D to duplicate. And then what we can do is change the Z to 1, and boom, looky there. We've got a box of monkeys that fits our printer. I don't know why on earth you would ever want to do that, but maybe you do. Maybe you have some like fancy $1 million powder printer and you want to print, you know, just tons and tons of Suzanne heads. This is how you do it. So now it's fitting it all inside of this bounding box because we told it to stay within the 250 millimeters. So that's a cool trick you can do with modifiers. But let's just simplify it. Let's go back to 1. Keep it simple. I know everyone's just learning. So now we have this monkey, right? We can also instead do constant offset. So let's do constant offset, maybe switch it to fixed count. We'll just do 3. And there are 3 monkeys here, but they're actually all on top of themselves because all of our distances are on 0. So let's slide the X and notice we've got 3 monkeys emerging, and you can essentially offset these monkeys by the center point of the origin. So from this center point of the origin to this next one is 26.86 millimeters. So if you wanted them to be exact, like 50, the origin from this monkey to this monkey is 50 millimeters. So constant is more from the origin to origin, whereas relative is doing it more by the bounding box that is invisibly around your object. So that's the kind of the main difference there. So in a nutshell, consistent is going to give you a lot more exactamundo dimensions that you can type in right there. So that is one way to use that. Another one down here is the object offset. So if you have these unchecked and do object offset, nothing happens. That's because we don't have an object to offset it. So let's make an invisible object. So to do that, do Shift A, and we're going to add an empty. It's essentially like a controller object of nothingness. It's pretty amazing. So we'll just do plain axis, and now there is a empty right here in the middle. It's very empty, but what we're going to do is take our monkey here, and I'm going to hit Alt-G to just to center it back up, and let's make our object the empty right here. So you should have something that says empty. Select that. And now if we click on the empty, make sure you have the empty. That's very important. And so with the empty selected, hit G to grab it. Looky there. Now we can move this around. That's pretty cool. You can also scale it, and that's going to scale, you know, keep compounding the scale. Or you can even rotate it. You know, maybe we want to increase the number of monkeys here. Go back to our empty and grab it and scale it. So notice here we've made some pretty complex geometries in a short amount of time. So I'm just rotating here. You can scale, rotate, and that's making some pretty funky stuff. So that is one cool way to use the object offset. Another thing you can do, if I just reset the rotation, I'll do Alt-R, Alt-S, and Alt-G, and now the empty is all reset. Another cool thing you can do is take your object, go into edit mode, select everything, and move the object away from the origin point. So I'm going to do G and Y, just bring it out front here. And if we go back into object mode, now we can rotate this empty on the Z axis like this, and just kind of click somewhere in there. And let's look at our rotation. So I have it at 37.8, but I'm not exactly sure what the equal distance is. So a cool trick you can do is go to your Suzanne, look at how many you have. So we have 9 monkeys. It can be any number you want, but just keep in mind whatever count number you have. So this is 9. And then you go back to your empty and do, for your Z rotation, do 360 divided by 9. Boom. There we have equal distance of this monkey. So now we have kind of like a little monkey bracelet if we wanted. Another cool thing you can do is go into, you can merge objects, and that's only if the points of an object are very, very, very close together. So it's not going to merge these ears together, even though that would be amazing if it would. It's just going to merge like geometry that's right on top of itself. Like if we did an array of a bunch of cubes, and all the corners were touching, merge would essentially join them together if they were close enough together. So I don't really use that a lot, but that's what that does. UVs is going to be more for rendering and more like animation and CG, which we don't really do too much of, so we're just ignoring that for now until we get into more advanced lessons. And the next one is caps, which we're going to cover in the chain section, so we're going to leave this for later, but this is amazing. So that's just some quick rundowns of the array modifier and what it can do. But let's stop dilly-dallying and let's make some chainmail, people. I know that's what you came here for, so let's do it. Let's go ahead and delete this monkey. Thank you, Suzanne, for all of your displaying of the array modifier. And we don't need it empty, so I'm just going to delete everything in there. That was just to show you guys and girls what the array modifier can do. But now let's get down to business and make some chainmail. So to do that, make sure you have your flexible design selected. Hit Shift A to make a mesh, and we're going to do a cube. So go ahead and select a cube, but it's super tiny. It's too tiny, so we're going to do 10. Boom. Looky there. We've got, actually, let's make it 20. Why not? I'm feeling dangerous. And so now we've got a cube here, and I'm going to give it some color because it's just so bland looking. We'll just do red. Boom. Looky there. We got a red cube. And so this is going to be the base piece of our, whatchamacallit, our little chainmail. So we'll hit G and Z, hold Control, and just kind of snap it to the floor there. So make sure I've got it on the floor. Yes, so I've got it on the floor. Go into edit mode and grab the top of your box and just bring it down, you know, somewhere in there, however tall you want your chainmail to be. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to do 10. So I just cut it in half, and I just held Control to get exact measurements here. So if we go into our object mode here, I've got a 20 by 20 by 10 little box here. All my scales at 1. So now what we want to do is add little cutter cubes. But first, let's rename this and call it main chain, because that's the one we're going to add the array modifier. So next, we're going to add another cube. Make sure your 3D cursor is in the center. If it's not, do Shift S1, and that will pop it back there. And we're going to do Shift A and add another cube. But this time we're going to make it a little smaller. So maybe like 15, something in that ballpark. That looks good. And what we're going to use this for is to cut out little chunks of our main chain here. So hit G and X and just move it over just a little bit, somewhere in there. We can always move these. And let's add a mirror modifier right here on the X. And nothing's happening because we need to tell the mirror modifier which objects to mirror around. So we're just going to take the little eyedropper and select this one. And looky there, we've got that selected here. And we can just click on the we'll call it maybe the cutter cubes. Cube 1. And we're just going to click on these and then shift click on our main chain here and do Control minus on the numpad. And that's going to chop out some little pieces here. And then what we can do is create another cube just like that, mesh cube. And it's going to be the same size, 15. And let's just bring this one up on the Z just a little bit and drag it on the Y just a little bit. So somewhere in there, and bring it up because we don't want the points to be intersecting. See here? So we want maybe G and Z and just kind of like in the center of this space right here. And let's bring these down. So G and Z. So we want them to just barely miss each other somewhere in there. If we look from the side, you can kind of see. There we go. So just barely missing each other. And we're going to do the same thing on this one. We'll just add a mirror modifier right here. Tell the object to be this guy. And we're going to do it on the Y this time. And then we'll just click on the cubes. This is our cutter cube 2. And shift click on this guy, Control minus. There we go. We've got some cutter cubes, but we actually do need them to intersect. So there's little holes that the chainmail can link to. So we'll just grab this, hit G and Z, bring it up, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it here, trying to make this edge right here look pretty even. That looks good. And then let's take the other cutter cube, the cutter cube 2, and do G and Z, and just bring that down until we've got a nice even amount right there. And there you go. So we can even move them in a little bit, G and Y, kind of make it a little skinnier. And I'm just kind of making every piece or every bar even as I can. So I want everything to have kind of like an even thickness to it. that looks pretty good. And there you go. Now we've got a little piece of chainmail, and everything is very flexible. So say if we wanted to come into edit mode and, make it shorter, taller, fatter, longer, we can do that. But I'm just going to leave it how we have it. And it looks pretty even and, ready for chainmailing, if you ask me. So everything looks nice and even. And let's go ahead and add some modifiers. So I'm just going to twiddle these up, go ahead and save. And now the fun part begins. But before we can do that, let's take our cubes and parent them to the main chain. So I'm just going to click them both, shift drag on top of it, and now they're inside of this chainmail. And so if we rotate on the z-axis 45, that's going to give us a better, kind of like a square patch of chainmail. If we left it sideways, it was going to be kind of at a diagonal, but just rotate it 45 degrees. You'll thank me later. And then what we want to do is add our modifier. We finally made it, guys and girls. Now we can add the array modifier and get to having some fun. So first off the bat, I'm going to do, not a relative offset. Let's do constant offset because we want it to be constant and we want to type in our measurements. So what you want to do is just barely offset this. Maybe it looks like 5. That looks good. And maybe on the Y 5. And so that looks terrible. So what we want to do is just keep doing it. Maybe it's 10. So we'll do 10. Oh, and accidentally turn the keyframes on. So I'm going to just hit Control Z to undo that. And let's just type in 10. There we go. And maybe for this one, 10. And that's looking better, but it's still running into each other. So let's just kind of scroll these around here. Somewhere in there. And somewhere in there. And what we want these to do is just link on the corners. So, I accidentally grabbed the Z. So just kind of mess with these until you get the links to kind of link up like that. And what I like to do is go to the top view and just kind of eyeball it there. Make sure everything looks nice and even. And that looks pretty good. And maybe do 3 just to kind of see what's going on here. And now we're going to do the trick that I showed you before. Is just duplicate this. So we'll just hover over it, do Shift D, and now we've got a duplicate. But instead of doing the offset in this direction, we want to do it in another direction. So we'll just zero these out. And let's bring them over a little bit, somewhere in there. So it looks like maybe 15. And this one, 15. Maybe negative 15. There we go. So that's getting close. That is not what we want. But what we're trying to do is just link everything up here. So somewhere there. And somewhere there. There we go. We're getting closer. So maybe 12 by 12. 12 by negative 12, maybe. So you may have to play with these values. But the goal is to make it as even as possible with the array. Now, can you imagine doing this by hand on every single object, trying to line them up and making sure they're all even? This would be a nightmare. So this is what you would use the array tool for, is just making these as even as possible. And that looks pretty good. It's probably not perfect, so I'm going to just even these up. Maybe try 13, see what that does. 13 by negative 13. Yeah, that looks a little more even. Let's check these values. We'll just make these 13 by 13. There we go. So keeping all the values even is going to give you a much more unified, even mesh. And there we go. We've got some chainmail, and that is the smallest version of chainmail. 3 by 3 is pretty good test, just to kind of get to see if your chainmail is working well. But let's crank it up to like maybe 6 by 6, and you can already see we've got a huge piece of chainmail. Let's just take it up even more. Let's go like 12 by 12. So 12 by 12. Boom! Looky there. We've got a huge piece of chainmail that you can modify. And you can make these main, the main chain, you can make it any shape you want. If you feel more creative or you want to do something really crazy cool, once you kind of understand this process, go at it, have fun, go to town and make some crazy chainmail. I'm just now starting this and it's already like exploding my mind with new ideas and new possibilities. But for now, I'm just going to simplify this, go down to 3 and go down to 3 and save. And let's just do Alt-G to bring it back. And there we go. So now everything is super flexible. If we change anything on this one piece of chainmail, so if we did GZ, it's going to apply that to all of them. So it's just very flexible workflow, very generative, very non-destructive, and I think you're going to love it. So let's go ahead and get it ready for 3D printing. So we'll just go to our 3D print tab. Make sure you have your main chain selected. Check all. Everything's zeroed out. That's the way we like it. And go to Export. Select your little folder. And I'm just going to hit Accept and Export. All right, so we got our chain here. And let's just check our settings. I'll do like 0.3. That's fine. Actually, 0.2. And support material, no raft. We'll just print this straight off the bed and slice it up. And looky there, we've got a nice piece of chainmail that will just print. We don't need supports. We don't need a raft. And it will just bridge right here and, become a piece of fabric or chainmail. So I would recommend using, regular PLA or some, maybe even flexible. You would get a lot of stringing, but it could be really cool. But this is going to take about an hour and a half. And let's go ahead and export the G code and print that thing.